The ship was called the Selam Drift, and it moved through space the way old things move, slowly, steadily, without hurry. It was a school ship, big enough to hold a small city inside it. Its halls were wide and lit with soft white light. Its rooms smelled of recycled air and something faintly sweet, like a fruit that did not exist on any one world. Students from dozens of different planets lived and learned on it. Some walked on 2 legs. Some had 4. Some rolled, or floated, or moved in ways that were hard to describe. The ship carried all of them together, and it had been doing that for over 200 years. Cole Navarro arrived on a Tuesday, by Earth reckoning. He came with 1 bag. It was a dark green bag, worn at the corners, and he carried it on one shoulder like it weighed nothing. He was 19 years old. He was not tall in the way that makes people stare, but he was built in the way that makes people careful, like every part of him had been put in the right place on purpose. His hair was dark and short. His eyes were the color of deep earth after rain. He walked through the intake corridor without looking at the walls, without stopping at the display screens that showed the ship's layout and welcome messages in 40 languages. He had already read them. The administrative officer who processed him was a Kavari named Das. Kavari looked something like a large insect crossed with a deer, with 6 limbs and wide amber eyes. Das had been processing students for 11 years and had never once felt nervous doing it. He felt nervous now. He looked at Cole's file on his screen, then looked at Cole, then looked back at the screen. "Your transfer documents are marked with a governance seal," Das said. "That is not common." Cole nodded. "I know. It says here that certain parts of your record are restricted. I cannot open them." "I know that too," Cole said. Das processed the transfer in silence after that. He assigned Cole a room on the mid-level residential deck, handed him a student card, and watched him walk away. Then Das sat very still for a moment and sent a quiet message to the ship's senior faculty coordinator. The message said only, "The human has arrived." Cole found his room, put his bag down, and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was small and clean. Through the narrow window, stars moved slowly past. He looked at them for a while. Then he unpacked his bag. He did not have much. Some clothes. A small book, paper, not digital. A photograph of a desert. That was all. The next morning, Cole went to his first class. It was xenobiology, taught by Dr. Pelavrox, a senior Kavari scholar with 6 arms and a voice like low thunder. The lecture hall was large and round, with seats arranged in rising levels around a central display platform. When Cole walked in, the room was already half full. He chose a seat near the middle, not at the back where people hide, not at the front where people perform. Just the middle. He set his notebook down and waited. The other students noticed him. They always did, with humans. There were very few humans on the Selam Drift, and humans had a reputation that came before them like a long shadow. A pair of Polarian students, soft-bodied and pale, shifted in their seats when Cole sat nearby. One of them moved 2 rows further away without saying anything. A Kashari student named Tef, narrow and quick-eyed, stared openly from across the room. Nara Osei was already in her seat when Cole came in. She was human too, from Ghana, with copper skin and close-cropped hair and the kind of steady confidence that comes from knowing who you are. She was one of only 3 humans currently enrolled on the ship. She watched Cole settle into his seat and noticed that he did not look around the room the way new students usually do. He did not seem anxious. He did not seem excited. He was just there, the way a stone is just in a field. She had heard he was coming. Everyone had. Dr. Vrox entered at exactly the scheduled time. She moved to the center platform with the economy of motion that old scholars develop, no wasted steps, no unnecessary gestures. She pulled up her lecture display, looked out at the class, and said, "Before we continue with today's material, I want to introduce a new member of our class. His name is Cole Navarro. He is human. He comes from a planet called Earth, which is classified as a Class 4 Deathworld. Please extend him the standard courtesies." She said it simply, the way she might introduce a new piece of equipment or an updated data set. But the room changed anyway. The Polarian students went very still. Tef stopped blinking. Even the air seemed to pause. Class 4 Deathworld. That was not a common classification. Most inhabited worlds sat at Class 1 or Class 2. Class 3 was considered extreme. Class 4 meant a planet where nearly every natural condition, the gravity, the atmosphere, the temperature range, the biology of the animals and plants, was hostile to most known life. It meant a world that had spent billions of years making things that could survive it. And the humans had not just survived it. They had built cities on it. They had thrived. Cole did not stand when Dr. Vrox introduced him. He raised one hand briefly, nodded, and put his hand back down. Zun, a young Polarian student sitting 2 rows to Cole's left, did not move away. Zun watched him with wide, unblinking eyes the color of milk glass. Polarians were curious creatures by nature, and Zun was especially so. It had read about humans before arriving on the ship. It had found the reading both terrifying and fascinating, the way children find deep water. Dr. Vrox resumed her lecture. Cole listened. He did not take many notes, but the ones he took were exact. When Dr. Vrox asked the class a question about cellular adaptation in low-oxygen environments, Cole answered it correctly, quietly, without raising his hand first. Dr. Vrox looked at him for a half-second longer than necessary, then moved on. After class, the students filed out. Most of them gave Cole a wide path without being obvious about it. A few looked at him sideways. Tef lingered near the door, watching. Nara walked past Cole's seat and slowed down slightly. Navarro, she said. He looked up. Osei, he said back. He had already read the student directory. She almost smiled. How was your first morning? Fine, he said. You are going to have to say more than that eventually, she told him. People here talk a lot. I know, he said. I am not against it. She left. Cole put his notebook in his bag and stood. Zun was still there, near the edge of the room, watching him. Cole looked at it. Zun made a small sound, not words, just a sound, and then floated quickly out of the door. Cole walked back through the ship's wide corridors toward the residential deck. He passed beings of a dozen different kinds. Some looked at him. Some looked away. He kept the same pace through all of it. Dr. Vrox stayed behind in the empty lecture hall. She opened Cole's student file on her data slate. She read through the parts that were visible. She looked at the gray blocks that covered the restricted sections. She had seen restricted records before. She had never seen this many gray blocks on a student file. At the bottom of the file, in the field marked Previous Occupation, a single line was visible. It read, Specialist, Grade 7, Human Defense Compact. Retired. Dr. Vrox set the slate down. She looked at the door through which Cole had walked. She had taught xenobiology for 22 years. She had a very good memory. And she was almost certain that she had never, in all that time, seen a student walk into her classroom with a file like that and simply sit down, open a notebook, and wait. She thought about that for a long time after the room was empty. Tef was the kind of student who needed to know things. It was not a bad quality, exactly. It was just very strong. He was Kashari, which meant he was narrow-framed, fast-moving, and had 4 fingers on each hand that never seemed to stop tapping on surfaces when he was thinking. He had been on the Selam Drift for 2 years, and in that time he had learned the name of every student aboard, the background of every teacher, and the general shape of every piece of news that moved through the ship. He was not a gossip. He just liked to understand things. Cole Navarro bothered him. Not in a threatening way. In the way that a locked drawer bothers a person who is used to opening things. Tef went to the ship's academic archive terminal the evening after Cole's first class. He typed in the name, waited, and got almost nothing. A birth record from a place called Las Cruces, New Mexico, on Earth. A basic schooling record that ran until Cole was 16 and then stopped. A gap of 3 years with no data at all, just a gray field with a small symbol in the corner that Tef had never seen before. Then, at 19, a re-entry into civilian education. And the transfer to the Selam Drift. Tef stared at the gray field for a while. He searched for the symbol in the corner. It took him some time to find it. When he did, he sat back in his chair. The symbol belonged to the Human Defense Compact, the Earth government body that managed what humans called their strategic forces. It was the kind of organization that did not appear often in public records. When it did appear, it usually meant that whatever came before that symbol was not available to ordinary viewers. Tef found Zun the next morning in the common area near the upper observation windows. Zun was floating near the glass, watching the stars in the way Polarians do when they are thinking about something long and slow. Tef sat down at the nearest table and told Zun what he had found. Zun listened. Its skin shifted through 3 shades of pale as Tef spoke, which was how Polarians showed that they were paying close attention. When Tef finished, Zun said, "What does the defense compact do, exactly?" "It trains people," Tef said. "For dangerous things." Zun thought about this. Dangerous to whom? Tef spread his 4 fingers. That is the part one cannot find out. 2 other students joined them before long. One was a Kavari named Brel, who was studying ship engineering and had very little interest in social drama but a great deal of interest in any system with classified components. The other was a small, quiet Polarian named OSI, who was Zun's study partner and followed Zun most places. Brel said, "On Earth, the military is a structured institution. Humans use ranks. The higher the rank or classification, the more specific the training. Grade 7 is their highest classification for individual operatives." Everyone looked at Brel. Brel's amber eyes moved slowly around the group. "I read about it last night," Brel added. After class. Zun's skin went a shade lighter. "What does a grade 7 operative do?" "Whatever needs to be done," Brel said. "In the most difficult situations. They are trained for years. They do not just learn to fight. They learn to think in emergencies. To plan. To survive things that would end most beings." Brel paused. "And then Cole came here. To school. To sit in a lecture hall and take notes." Nobody said anything for a moment. Nara heard this conversation. She was sitting at a table behind them, close enough to catch most of it. She had a cup of something warm in her hands and a book open in front of her, but she had stopped reading when Tef started talking. She listened to the end, then she put her cup down and looked at the group. "He was not sent here," she said. They all turned. "He chose to come." Tef blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because the compact does not volunteer its grade 7s to school ships," she said. "If he is here, he asked to be. They let him go because he had grounds to ask." She looked back at her book. "My brother served in a defense force. Not like Cole, not at that level, but enough. When people like that leave, they have usually earned the right." The group thought about this. OSI made a small sound. Zun looked out at the stars again. That afternoon, Cole was in the ship's observation lounge, which was a wide room with a curved window that took up most of one wall. The stars outside were thick and still. He was sitting alone with a cup of coffee, which he had made himself in the small kitchen unit near the lounge entrance. It was the only thing he had made since arriving on the ship. He was just sitting with it, looking out. Professor Aaron Solis found him there. Solis was one of 3 human faculty members on the ship. He was older, with gray at his temples and a calm face that gave very little away. He had managed Cole's intake documents personally. He sat down across from Cole without asking, which was the kind of thing only certain people do, and it usually means they have known enough difficult people to understand that permission is sometimes just a formality. "How is it going?" Solis asked. "Fine," Cole said. "The students are talking about you." "I know." Cole looked at his coffee. "They were always going to." "Does that bother you?" Cole thought about it honestly. "Not the way it might bother someone else," he said. "It is just noise. It will settle." Solis nodded. He looked out the window for a while. "You know, this is a strange place for someone with your background." "You said that during intake," Cole said. "I am saying it again." "I know it is strange," Cole said. "I chose it anyway." He looked at Solis. "I did not want to go somewhere that felt like the last place. I wanted somewhere that felt like something different." Solis did not push it further. They sat together for a while without speaking. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have both been in rooms where silence meant something much heavier. Later that same evening, a junior student from a non-contact species called the Vendi got lost during a ship-wide pressurization drill. The Vendi were small, slow-moving, and had difficulty reading the ship's standard signage. This one had wandered into a secondary corridor that sealed automatically during drill mode. The door was heavy and required a ship crew override to open from the outside. Inside, the student stood very still, breathing carefully, pressed against the wall. Cole was passing through the adjacent junction when the drill alarm sounded. He heard the automatic seal engage. He looked at the door. He looked at the small figure visible through the narrow porthole window in the door. He moved to the manual release panel on the wall, the one that crew members use during emergencies. It was not locked. It was just not obvious. Cole opened the access cover, read the mechanism, and had the door open in 11 seconds. The Vendi student came through the door slowly. It looked up at Cole. Cole looked down at it. He pointed down the corridor in the direction of the nearest common area. The student went that way. Cole closed the access panel and continued walking. He had not run. He had not made noise. He had not waited for anyone else to handle it. Zun was at the far end of the corridor. It had seen all of it. It stood very still as Cole walked past. Cole gave it a small nod. Zun watched him go, and its skin moved through a slow, deep color that had no easy translation into any other language, but on Polaris, it was a color that meant, "I think I am beginning to understand." That night, Tef added a note to his private file on Cole Navarro. The note said, "Not what I expected." He sat with that sentence for a while, then closed the file and went to sleep. The next morning, when Cole walked into Dr. Vrox's class, the Polarian students did not move their seats. Every student on the Sealam Drift who came aboard with a specialized prior background was required to complete a formal assessment before the end of their first month. For most students, this meant a basic physical fitness review and a standard aptitude scan, the kind of thing that took 20 minutes and produced a short file that no one ever looked at again. For Cole Navarro, the administration had made different arrangements. Lieutenant Cass Veruin had been assigned to conduct the assessment personally. She was a Kavari security officer, older than most of the faculty, with a heavily decorated service record and a quiet manner that people sometimes mistook for softness. It was not softness. It was control. She had spent 41 years working in security roles across 4 different ships and 2 planetary installations. She had assessed athletes, veterans, former law enforcement officers, and 3 previous humans. She read Cole's partial file the night before the assessment and then sat with her hands folded on her desk for a long time. Word got out, the way it always does on a school ship. By the time the assessment was scheduled to begin, there were students gathered at the observation windows above the ship's training suite. The training suite was a large room on the lower deck, with padded floors and adjustable gravity and enough open space to run proper physical evaluations. The windows above it were normally used by students watching sports or team exercises. Today they were pressed with faces of many shapes and colors. Tef was there with a small recording device. Brel stood beside him, arms crossed. Zun was at the glass, soft body pressed gently forward. Nara stood a little behind the others, not pressing against the window, just watching. Cole came in wearing simple training clothes. He put his bag against the wall and stood in the center of the room, waiting. Cass Veruin entered from the far door and crossed the floor toward him. She was tall for a Kavari, and she moved like someone who had never once been in a hurry because they had always been prepared. She introduced herself. Cole said his name, which she already knew. She said she was going to take him through a series of tasks and that he should perform them as he normally would, without exaggeration in either direction. He nodded. She believed him. The first tasks were simple. Endurance. Cole ran on the track setting for 12 minutes without visible effort. His breathing barely changed. The monitor on the wall showed his heart rate climbing slowly and then leveling. Cass Veruin made a note. Load capacity. Cole lifted, carried, and repositioned equipment weights that were set at levels considered high even for humans. He did it without particular expression, the way someone carries groceries. Brel, watching from above, quietly recalculated the weight in its head and then stopped talking. Reflex response came next. A series of small lights appeared on the walls in random patterns, and the student being assessed had to touch each one before it went dark. Most students got between 60 and 70%. Cole got 94. He missed the ones that appeared directly behind him, because he had not turned far enough in time. He noted this himself, out loud, after the test. Cass Veruin made another note. Spatial navigation under sensory interference was the fourth task. Cole was given a small electronic map of a corridor maze, and then the room's lighting was cut and a low-frequency sound was played through the floor, a technique the Kavari called drift noise, because it made moving in a straight line feel slightly diagonal. Most non-Kavari students struggled significantly with drift noise. Cole moved through the maze at a steady pace, pausing twice to recalibrate, and completed it 40 seconds ahead of the standard benchmark time. The crowd at the window was silent by now. Tef had stopped pointing his recording device at his friends and was pointing it only at Cole. Then Cass Veruin did something that was not on the standard assessment list. She crossed to the room's central console and pulled up a holographic scenario. It was one the ship's security team used for training drills. She had used it herself many times. She looked at Cole and said, "This is a simulated scenario. There are no right or wrong procedures. I want to see how you think." Cole looked at the holographic display as it built itself in the air in front of him. A corridor. 3 figures representing threats, positioned at different points. A 4th figure, marked in blue, representing a civilian. A structural element, a support beam, flickering red to indicate it was failing. A timer in the corner reading 6 seconds. 6 seconds. That was the window. Cole stood still for 2 of them. His eyes moved across the scenario, and in that moment the students watching him from above saw something change. It was not dramatic. His face did not shift. His posture did not change. But something became very focused in him, the way a lens becomes focused when it is turned correctly, and suddenly what had been soft and blurred becomes sharp and exact. Then he moved. What he did in the next 4 seconds was not something that could be fully described by watching it once. He addressed the 3 threat positions not in the order they appeared on screen but in the order that created the least interference, so that each one fell without disrupting his path to the next. He reached the structural element and put his weight against it in a way that changed the direction of its collapse. The civilian marker moved clear. He stepped back. The timer stopped at 5 seconds and 41 fractions. The room was absolutely quiet. Cass Veruin stood still for a long moment. She looked at her data slate. She looked at Cole, who had returned to standing in the center of the room as if nothing unusual had happened. She looked at the slate again. She said, "Your classification file listed you as a former specialist, grade 7. "Yes," Cole said. "Grade 7 is the highest individual operative classification the Human Defense Compact issues," she said. Cole said nothing. "I want you to know," Cass Veruin said, and her voice was careful and even, "that in 41 years of service, I have assessed 14 humans at this facility." She paused. "You are the first grade 7 I have met in person." Cole looked at her. "Is the assessment complete?" he asked. "It is," she said. "Thank you," he said. He picked up his bag from the wall and walked out. Above the training suite, nobody moved. Tef held his recording device down at his side, not recording anymore, just holding it. Brel had uncrossed its arms at some point and not recrossed them. Zun's skin was the palest it had been in months. Nara was the first one to speak. She said, quietly, mostly to herself, "He did not even breathe hard." Zun turned to look at her. "Were you not afraid?" it asked. Nara thought about it for a moment. "No," she said. "But I think I understand something now that I did not understand before." "What?" Zun asked. Nara looked at the empty training room below, where the holographic scenario had faded and the lights were back to normal and it looked like just a room again. "That there is a very large difference," she said, "between something dangerous and something that chooses when to be." Zun looked at the room too. It did not have a word for what Nara meant, not exactly. But it stored the idea away carefully, the way Polarians do when they encounter something they know they will need to think about for a long time. That evening, Cass Veruin submitted her assessment report. It was the longest report she had ever written for a student evaluation. In the final section, where officers noted anything relevant for the ship's administration, she wrote one sentence: "This student presents no risk to this vessel or its crew." She paused. Then she added a second sentence: "On the contrary, there was a corridor on the Sealam Drift that most students did not know about." It was not hidden, exactly, it appeared on every deck map, but it was out of the way, at the end of a passage that branched off the mid-level residential deck and went nowhere useful. The administration had planted it with living specimens from 100 different worlds, small trees with leaves in colors that had no name in most languages, flowering vines that opened and closed on slow cycles, and low-ground plants with soft, dense textures. The ship's systems kept the corridor at a comfortable temperature and filled it with just enough moisture that it always smelled of something growing. It was the only place on the Sealam Drift that smelled like anything at all, rather than filtered air. Cole had found it on his third day. He went there in the evening sometimes, when the residential deck was loud with students coming back from dinner. He would sit on one of the low benches the planting team had placed between the specimen rows, and he would just be there for a while. He did not read. He did not play anything through his earpiece. He just sat. Nara found him there on a Thursday evening, 4 days after the assessment. She had been thinking about this conversation since she watched him walk out of the training suite. She had been careful about it, waiting until she felt ready, which was not something she usually bothered with. She was direct by nature and by choice. The fact that she had waited 4 days told her something about how seriously she was taking this. She sat down on the bench beside him without asking. Cole looked at her. He did not seem surprised. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to actually answer." "All right," he said. "Why did you leave?" she said. "The compact does not let grade 7s walk away easily. So why are you here and not there?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that is avoiding the question. The kind that is choosing the right words carefully, the way someone picks up a tool that needs to be used precisely. "I asked to leave," he said. "And they let you." "They owed me something," he said. "I had earned the ask." He paused. "So I asked. And they let me." Nara looked at him. She did not ask what they owed him. Some things you do not ask, not because you cannot, but because you understand that the answer lives in a part of a person they have the right to keep. "Do you miss it?" she said instead. Cole looked at the row of plants across from the bench. There was a small tree from a moon called Serev that had silver bark and leaves that turned slowly like they were looking for light that was not quite there. He watched it for a moment. "I miss being useful," he said. "I do not miss what I was useful for." Nara understood that completely. She had heard her brother say something close to it once, sitting in her family's kitchen in Accra, 3 weeks after he came home from his third tour. He had said, "I am glad I did it and I am glad it is over." He had never explained more than that, and she had never asked him to. "What made you choose a school ship?" she said. Cole thought about it. "I wanted somewhere that was moving," he said. "And somewhere that was full of things I did not already know." He looked at the silver tree again. "Everything I did before was very narrow. I was very good at a narrow set of things. I did not want to stay narrow." Nara nodded slowly. She thought that was one of the most honest things she had heard anyone say about themselves in a long time. Most people, when they have been very good at something, do not talk about the narrowness. They talk about the skill. They sat quietly for a while. The corridor was warm and still. Somewhere further along, one of the flowering vines opened a bloom and released a faint smell like rain on dry earth. Zun appeared at the far end of the corridor. It stopped when it saw them. Cole and Nara both looked at it. Zun hesitated for a long moment, which was unusual for Zun, who was normally either floating forward into things or floating quickly away from them. Then it came down the corridor and settled on the floor near the bench. It sat the way Polarians sit when they are being very careful, pulled slightly into itself, taking up less space than usual. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Zun said, "I have been thinking about what you did in the training suite." Cole looked at it. "All right," he said. "On Polaris," Zun said slowly, "we do not have a concept for what you are. We have words for dangerous things. We have words for powerful things. But those words always carry something dark with them. Something that hurts other things because it cannot help it, or because it wants to. It shifted slightly. What you did in that room was not like those words. You did not look like something that could not help itself. You looked like something that knew exactly what it was doing, and had chosen very carefully what to do with that. Cole listened without interrupting. We have a word on Polaris, Zun continued, for the deep ocean. The part where the pressure is very high and nothing soft survives. We use that word sometimes for things that are powerful but not cruel. For forces that are simply what they are, without wanting to damage anything. It looked at Cole steadily. I think I would use that word for you. Cole looked at the small Polarian for a moment. Then he said, that is a kind thing to say. Zun's skin moved through a slow, warm color. On Polaris, that color meant something close to relief. Nara watched this. She thought about her brother again, about how he had come home quieter and how their mother had worried and how Nara herself had not known what to say to him for the first few weeks. She thought about how he had spent his last visit home teaching her nephew to build a kite out of paper and thin sticks, crouching in the garden with total patience, redoing the frame 3 times until it was right. She thought that there is more than one way to be shaped by hard things. Some things that go through a great deal of pressure come out sharp and dangerous. And some come out still and steady, like stone that has been polished by a river until it is smooth. Cole was looking at the plants again. He was not smiling, exactly. But there was something in his face that was less guarded than it had been when she first met him. Professor Solis came down the corridor a few minutes later. He was moving at an evening pace, hands in his jacket pockets, not in any hurry. He saw the 3 of them on the bench and on the floor. He stopped walking. Cole looked at him. Nara looked at him. Zun turned its head. Solis looked at the 3 of them for a moment. His expression was the expression of someone who has quietly hoped for something and has just seen it happen. He gave Cole a small nod. Cole returned it. Then Solis turned and walked a different way down the corridor, choosing the longer route back to the faculty wing without explanation. After he was gone, Zun said, "What was that about?" "Nothing," Cole said. But the corners of his mouth moved very slightly, just enough that Nara noticed. They stayed in the botanical corridor for another hour. Zun asked Cole about Earth, about what gravity felt like when it was heavier than standard, about whether it was true that Earth had oceans that covered most of its surface. Cole answered everything simply and accurately. He did not make it dramatic. He did not make the planet sound terrifying or wonderful. He just described it the way you describe a place you know very well, matter-of-factly, with small details that only someone who had actually been there would think to include. When they finally left the corridor, the ship was quieter and the lights in the hallways had shifted to their lower evening setting. Zun floated ahead. Nara walked beside Cole for a while. She said, "Same time next week." Cole considered this. "Probably," he said. That was enough. The alarm sounded at 3:14 ship time, when most of the Sealam drift was asleep. It was a low, cycling tone that the ship used for emergencies that were serious but not yet critical, not the full evacuation alert, but something close to it. The lights in the residential corridor shifted from the dim night setting to a brighter amber. Doors along the residential deck opened one by one as students emerged, confused, some still in sleep clothes, looking down the halls at each other. The ship had entered the gravitational wake of a binary star system 18 hours earlier. The navigational team had calculated the path carefully, and under normal conditions the transit should have taken 6 hours and caused minimal stress on the hull. But a secondary propulsion ring on the port side had begun failing 3 hours into the transit. By the time the engineering team identified the fault, the cascade had already spread to 2 adjacent systems. The ship's hull, particularly on the lower residential deck, was beginning to feel the full pull of the binary system's tidal force. 3 engineering bays were locked down immediately. A section of the student residential corridor on level 4 lost its gravity plating. 14 students were in that section when the lock engaged, and the sealed doors closed before any of them could get out. Cole was already in the corridor when the alarm sounded. He had not been sleeping. He was moving through the lower deck at his usual quiet pace, returning from the botanical corridor with a book under his arm, when he felt the deck shudder beneath his feet, a long, deep vibration that was nothing like the normal hum of the ship's engines. He stopped walking. He put his hand flat against the wall and felt it again. Then he turned and walked quickly back toward his room. By the time he had his environment suit on and was back in the corridor, Cass Veruin was already there with 2 crew members. She was in full security gear, a data slate in one hand and a communication piece in her ear. She was moving fast but not running, which told Cole that she was managing urgency without allowing panic, which was the right approach. She saw him. She looked at his suit. She did not tell him to go back to his room. 14 students sealed in Level 4, Section C, she said. 2 crew units are trying to reach them from the engineering side. We are blocked by the locked engineering bays. The gravity in that section is unstable and dropping. What is our time window? Cole asked. 11 minutes before the tidal stress makes that section inaccessible, she said. Cole nodded. Show me the layout. She handed him the data slate. He looked at it for 4 seconds, handed it back, and started moving. She kept pace with him. The 2 crew members followed. The next 11 minutes were not dramatic in the way that emergencies look in recordings. There was no single moment of heroism with a clear beginning and end. It was a sequence of small, exact decisions made one after another without pause, and the decisions were correct because Cole did not spend time being afraid or uncertain. He spent it reading the situation in front of him and acting on what it told him. The first 2 students he reached were a pair of Polarians who had floated to the ceiling when the gravity plating cut out and could not get back down. Polarians can move well in water but not in open air without gravity. Cole talked to them in a low, steady voice while he moved beneath them and guided them hand over hand along the corridor wall to the sealed door junction. He did not rush them. He kept his voice at the same level throughout. They came down. The structural support for the corridor section had buckled in 2 places under the tidal stress. One of the buckled panels was pressing against a ventilation shaft cover, and if the shaft closed it would cut air flow to the sealed section. Cole braced himself against the panel with his full body weight and held it for 4 minutes while the crew technician beside him used a cutting tool to clear the secondary seal. 4 minutes is a long time to hold something that is under pressure. Cole held it without speaking. Tef was behind a storage container near the far end of the section. He had been trying to move toward the door when the gravity cut out and had fallen and hit the container hard. His left arm was fractured. He was sitting very still with the arm held against his chest, not making noise, which was sensible because noise uses air and the section's air was not cycling properly. Cole found him, assessed the arm quickly, told him what was going to happen, and then picked him up and carried him through 2 airlocks to where Cass Veruin and a medical crew member were waiting. Tef said nothing during the carry. When Cole set him down, Tef looked up at him and opened his mouth. Cole shook his head slightly, not dismissively, just indicating that there was no time, and went back. The last student in the section was Zun. The corridor where Zun was located had lost almost all of its atmospheric pressure. The seal on that end had been compromised by the tidal stress, and the air was thin and dropping. Cole's environment suit had enough reserve oxygen for 4 minutes at that pressure level. He checked the gauge on his wrist and then went in anyway. Zun was alive. But it had contracted its body into a tight sphere, a defensive response that Polarians use when conditions become dangerous. In that state, they cannot hear well and cannot see clearly. They can only feel vibrations. Cole crouched down beside the contracted sphere that was Zun. He did not shout. The suit's radio would not reach through Zun's contracted form. He put his hand against Zun's surface and held it there steadily. Vibrations. That was what Polarians could feel. Cole tapped a slow rhythm against Zun's body. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, a pause. Steady and even. Not urgent. Not fast. Just present. Something that said, I am here. I am not leaving. You are not alone. Zun's skin shifted, even contracted, even in a section with failing air. The sphere loosened. Slowly, like a hand releasing something it had been holding too tightly, Zun uncurled. Cole picked it up. He stood, checked his gauge, 90 seconds of reserve remaining, and walked back through the corridor at an even pace. Not running. Running would use the air faster. He came through the seal door with 40 seconds to spare. The medical team took Zun. Cass Veruin stood beside Cole as he removed his helmet. She looked at the gauge reading on the suit. She said nothing. All 14 students were out. The ship's engineering team restored hull stability 20 minutes later, once the tidal transit was complete. The emergency was over. Nobody had been lost. The ship's crew chief reviewed the event log the following morning. She went through the timeline, noted the crew's response, and then came to the section of the record that covered the activity in the Level 4 corridor. She read it through twice. Then she went to find Cass Veruin. The response pattern in Section C, the crew chief said. It is not in our emergency manuals. No, Cass Veruin said. It is not from our manuals. The crew chief looked at her. Whose manuals is it from? Cass Veruin considered this. His own, she said. 3 days later, Dr. Vrox resumed her xenobiology lecture. The room looked the same as it had on Cole's first day. The same rising seats, the same round display platform, the same soft white light. Dr. Vrox stood at the center and opened her notes. But the room was not the same. Tef sat at the front, his arm in a cast, a stylus ready in his good hand. The Polarian students were in their usual seats, without the extra space they used to leave around them. Brel was there, quiet as always, but sitting forward rather than back. And Zun was in the seat directly beside Cole. Dr. Vrox looked at the class. She looked at Cole for a moment, the way she had looked at him that first day, carefully, noting something. Then she looked at her notes. Today, she said, we are covering the human cardiovascular system. I recommend paying close attention. The class leaned in. Cole looked at the display board as it lit up with the first diagram. He did not smile. But something in his face was different from the first day, quieter, maybe, or perhaps just more settled, the way a person looks when they are in a place they have decided belongs to them. Outside the wide windows of the Selam drift, the stars continued moving past, slow and steady and without hurry, the way they always have and always will.